Hello, we are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we're carrying on our review of the book The Asatir, microform, the Samaritan Book of the Secrets of Moses by Moses Gester, 1856 to 1939. We're not going to go deep and read all the book like we did previously. We're just going to look at some points we found really interesting. Statement of pseudo-upolemos. Gifkin thus agrees that Sybil knew pseudo-upolemos, that Abraham knew the revolutions of the sun and moon. Gifkin has entirely misunderstood the passage in Upolemos. The Sybil vehemently protested only against astrology and all kinds of idolatrous abominations, not a word of which is to be found in Upolemos. Furthermore, we have precisely the same anachronism noticed in the Sybil as in all the records before, and if we carefully examine the text, we shall find the Sybil, like Upolemos, mentioning 10 generations that have passed between the deluge, or the great flood, and the story of the Titans, the giants, thus making the Titan, i.e. Nimrod, contemporary with Abraham, whose story is told under the form of a Greek myth. Gathering up all the threads of the various parallels and comparisons, 2 points stand out clearly. In the first place, there is the closest possible similarity between the essential details in the story of the Sybil of Titan, Saturn, and Japhetos, of the slaughter of the male children, the imprisonment of his parents, the secret birth and removal of the male child, which is to grow up, avenge the wrong, and finally destroy Titan, with the draperies having been taken from Greek mythology, as told by Homeros, and the story of Nimrod and Abraham, as told by the Asatir, or the Samaritan text, and the Samaritan commentary on the one hand, and by the Hebrew, Arabic, and Jewish Hebrew legends on the other. And down below here is a footnote, because up here was a footnote indication under sun and moon, beside sun and moon. The real character of the statement that Abraham knew the revolutions of the sun and moon, as mentioned by the Upolemos, can be understood only if viewed in the light of Samaritan tradition. Abraham is not credited with any knowledge of astrology, but with a knowledge of the calendar, which according to the Samaritans is based on the direct teaching of God, who had communicated it to Adam, and which then had been handed on from generation to generation down to Abraham. The fixing of the new moon, when they did that new moon and they had that Day of Atonement, killed a spotless lamb or ram, and sprinkled the blood over the people for the atonement of their sins, forgiveness of their sins, the house of Israel. And that wasn't a Sabbath, that was just a new moon for that time of atonement. And of the year with them rested upon astronomical calculations, and it is this knowledge which is the basis of the calendar, and which Abraham possessed and communicated to the Phoenicians and others. On this point, see also further on, details further on. Returning now to pseudo-upolemos, the parallelism between the latter and the Asatir, the Samaritan text, is still more marked than that with the Sybil. So we find that after having told the story of the fight of Abraham against the Armenians, pseudo-upolemos goes on to tell the story of what happened to Abraham in Egypt, leaving out the first portion in which he tells of the giants and of the wars of Abraham given before. He continues as follows. But when the famine set in, Abraham repaired to Egypt. But when the famine set in, Abraham repaired, or he journeyed to Egypt, and there settled down with his whole family, because Egypt was the land of plenty, right? They sowed their grains, etc. when the Nile flooded over in the black soil, because it's really rich, fertile. That's what's known as a fertile place, because the black soil, etc. And then when everything was ready to be harvested, they'd all drop their paint brushes and whatever they're professional at, did professionally, and helped to bring in all this wheat or grain or whatever and so forth, and put it in barns, store it in the pyramids or wherever they stored it. But so it always had plenty, because then the do their thing for another time, another period, and then the Nile would flood over again and leave this black soil on the side of the banks, and then eventually go down and the plant there, right, in that soil again. They kept doing that process, and then storing it in barns. So that them having like Jacob and having a famine in their land, or Goshen or whatever, they decided, well, as the people in Europe, when they had a famine at that time, realised, oh, okay, we'll go down to Egypt because they've got plenty. And the Egyptians, apparently, according to John Clark, etc., says they were nice people and they welcomed them in, but they took advantage after a while. So they ended up ousting them. Okay, so when the famine set in, Abraham repaired to Egypt. He journeyed down to Egypt, land of plenty, and then settled down with his whole family. And the king of the Egyptians married Abraham's wife, Sarah, because he alleged that she was his sister. In further detail, he records how he found no pleasure in his union with her, and how his people and his household were destroyed, and how, summoning his seers, they told him the fact that the woman was not unmarried at all. How also the king of the Egyptians thus found out that she was Abraham's wife, and how he returned her to her husband. How also he dwelt among the Egyptian priests in Heliopolis, i.e. the Sun City, and taught them many things, and introduced among them astrology and other things. He, Upalemus, says that the discovery of it belongs to Enoch, and that he was the originator of astrology, not the Egyptians. For the Babylonians say that Belos was the first man, the same as Kronos, of the Greek probably, and from him sprang a second Belos, who was Ham, and he begat Cham, who begat Chanaan, okay, that's probably Cam, who begat Canaan, who was the father of the Phoenicians, and he also begat, born to him was Chus, who was called by the Greeks Asbolos, the progenitor of the Ethiopians, the forefather of the Ethiopians, and the brother of Mesraim, who was progenitor, what the hell's that word? Progenitor of the Egyptians. Let's talk about the Mesraim was probably the Mithraim, okay, or the Egyptians. The Greeks say that Atlas originated astrology, but Atlas is the same as Enoch. The son of Enoch was Methuselah in the Bible, who learned everything through the agency of the angels of God, and we acknowledge this fact. Now it's the story of Abraham's descent in Egypt, with all the details contained in pseudo-Eupolemus. Eupolemus is not found in the Bible, neither has Freudenthal nor Beer, who has written a book on all the legends referring to Abraham, been able to find a close parallel in any Jewish Midrash. The nearest approach to the story is the reference to it in Josephus, but Josephus, in his usual way, has enlarged upon the simple story, he's exaggerated, and has omitted or left out one or two of the essential details, such as the peculiar illness of Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt, and his household. The closest parallel is now found in the Asatir, chapter 6, 10FF. Not only, as we remarked before, do pseudo-Eupolemus and the Asatir go together in putting the journey to Egypt after the war with the giants contrary to the Bible, but also most of the other essential details given by pseudo-Eupolemus are set out fully and in a much more coherent manner by the author of the Asatir. The illness of Pharaoh, the calling in of the soothsayers, or these healers, magic men, pointing out that the woman whom he has taken into his house is the only cause of the plague, somebody else's wife. When Abraham said, no, she's my sister, and then when he was scolded, he said, no, indeed she is my sister. She's the daughter of my father to another mother, right, or another woman, something like that. And Abraham disputing or discussing with the wise men and proclaiming the faith are all found there. It may be objected that pseudo-Eupolemus may have confused the story of Abraham's sojourn into Egypt, or journey to Egypt, or passage there, or stay there, with the parallel story of a sojourn among the Philistines, or a stay amongst the Philistines. In the latter story, some of the points to which attention has been drawn, such as Pharaoh's illness, consultation of soothsayers, etc., are indeed to be found. How great pseudo-Eupolemus' knowledge of the Bible may have been would be difficult to say, but this very confusion proves absolutely the close relation, nay, the very dependence of pseudo-Eupolemus on the Asatir, the Samaritan text. For it to be a confusion, it is already in the Asatir, which also contains no mention of Abimelech, and tells the tale as happening to Pharaoh only. The author has gone very far in his Midrashic license, and here, as in other passages, he does not hesitate to deviate from the record of the Bible. His was a book of legends, and has to be judged as such, and as such it served also as a source to pseudo-Upalemos and other Hellenistic writers who did not hesitate to make use of it as far as it suited their purposes, for the book must have been invested with some authority. There is one notable feature in the Asatir version, and that is that mention is specifically made of a magician, volume 6, 18 WF, who has studied in the book of signs, i.e. the heavenly signs, and who is the man who tells Pharaoh, or the king of Egypt, of the importance of Abraham. He explains furthermore the reason for the falling down of the idols at the moment when Abraham enters Egypt. Both these incidents are omitted or left out by pseudo-Upalemos. What he says about Abraham's teaching the priests of Egypt astrology must be understood in the same manner as the teaching which he gives to the Phoenicians, where Upalemos also uses the word astrology, but explains it immediately after by saying the science of the revolutions of the sun and the moon. In Josephus, Antiquities 1:8, we find the same elements, and although they are worked up and amplified to a great extent, or maybe exaggerated, one can easily recognize that he must have drawn his information from the same source as pseudo-Upalemos in the Asatir, the Samaritan text. He also makes it perfectly clear that Abraham did not teach astrology in the latter sense of the word, but he says deliberately that Abraham taught them arithmetic, or math, and astronomy, and adds that the latter was of Chaldean origin, and that Abraham brought it to Egypt. A characteristic of Josephus and a proof of his later date is that he regularly omits or leaves out definite details, such as a reference to the magician, to his name, and other similar details. Josephus prefers, as a rule, a general statement in the rhetorical style of the time, and so forth. And it goes on about the Hebrew word Moadim, which means festival, and that this knowledge had been imparted to Adam, and so forth, and that they have here the real source of the legend, that Abraham teaches astronomy to the Phoenicians and Egyptians. In the book of Jubilees, it is Noah to whom the secret of the calendar is revealed, in 4:17. For with him the new order of the world begins, and Enoch is also mixed up later on with the knowledge of astronomy and astrology, the legend of his translation to heaven being more fully developed. Translation there means his transportation, or he's taken from one place and put somewhere else for a certain reason. Right? Maybe the Great Flood was coming or something like that, and he was to be saved from that. So he's taken up and transported to another place of safety. And there's plenty more on the Asatir or the Samaritan text. Here we just noticed, is it talking about the Antichrist legend? Daniel was anxious about the future, and God tells him that the number of kings will arise who in turn will do good or evil to the Jews, and that in the end a false Messiah will appear. And a Jewish parallel to the Christian Antichrist and the Day of Judgment is briefly given. Muhammad and his successors, the Caliphs, are clearly indicated in that list of kings, which however is not carried down to the destruction of the Abbasid dynasty. Among the signs which the Jews will ask the false Messiah to produce in order to justify his claim is also the rite of miracles of Moses, a point which deserves to be noted, for as Zotenberg remarks, the apocalypse, though dealing with the events of a later period, rests in all probability upon a more ancient recension, and what is still more important is the statement that the Persian is in all probability a translation from an Aramaic text, thus bringing it within the sphere of our investigation. It assists in proving an Oriental origin for the symbol of Tibur. They do a comparison here. Parallels. Asatir, chapter 12. A prince will arise strong in truth, and his days of salvation of the community will be great. Symbol of Tibur. After him shall arise a king. He shall be very great and very pious, or very righteous, very religious, and shall execute judgment and do justice to the poor. Secular symbol, text, page 182. Footnote. It is a remarkable fact that in 2 or 3 places the version found in the Matthew of Paris recension seems to contain some ancient details missing in the symbol of Tibur. Secular's text, for example. Barbarians, the word Matthew of Paris, page 46, which is missing in Secular. Another comparison here with the symbol of Tibur. Pretty close. The Asatir and Josephus. The consensus of opinions of almost everyone who has studied the writings of Josephus, and more particularly his Antiquities, is that in addition to the apologetic character which he, of necessity, gave to a book adapted to a heathen or Greek public, he is accused of having introduced many legends and fantastic interpretations, mostly of his own fabrication, or borrowed from Hellenistic writers or Greek writers, all believed to have been of Egyptian origin. It will now cause no little surprise if we assert that many of these legends, far from being his own invention, were in fact drawn from a source closely approximating the Asatir or the Samaritan text. It must be borne in mind that there is a profound difference between the works of Josephus and the Asatir. The latter consists mostly of legendary glosses and tales added to the text of the Bible. The Bible is principally supposed to be known to the reader, and therefore everything contained therein is entirely omitted in the Asatir, so it's left out. As already remarked before, neither is there in it any apologetic tendency, nor the desire of paraphrasing the text in such a manner as to make the story of the Bible more plausible or compatible, or more acceptable to the Gentile reader, non-Jew reader. Right? The Asatir is only one aim, to fill up the lacunae in the historical narrative to supplement with a few more or less explanatory details the lives of the patriarchs, i.e. Abraham, etc., and to emphasize the truth of the Samaritan claims to be the possessors of the genuine text of the Bible and the strict observers of the law. With this exception, the rest comes within the sphere of Agadic Midrash, not so Josephus. He, like many of his predecessors, or those before him, recounts anew the whole history of the Jewish people from the creation down to his own time. His book is written for a wider circle. It has an apologetic tendency, since it was intended to present the biblical narrative to the Gentile or non-Jew reader in the most alluring form, and it glosses over every difficulty so as to make it as readable as could be done by the skill of the writer, who was conscious at the same time that he was performing a sacred and patriotic task. Josephus, by following the account given in the sacred books, weaves into it a mass of legendary matter. This was done with a definite purpose, and as will be seen following more or less an older example, the Gentile reader had no necessity to recur to Josephus' work for knowledge of the Bible. As such, since he had at his disposal the Greek translation of the al-Asāṭīr or Septuagint, centuries older than Josephus, and in his time already invested with a special character of authority, Josephus, on the contrary, had another intention. He wanted to make a new presentation in a popular and acceptable form, and in the spirit of his time or his era. At the same time, he made use of legendary matter, which had already won popularity among his countrymen. Anticipating here already the results of the author's investigation, he should formulate them at once in the statement that Josephus wrote a Greek Targum to the Pentateuch, parallel to the Aramaic Targum then in vogue among the Jews, or which was known or popular among the Jews. Well known or popular. They were familiar with it. From the point of view, a new light is thrown onto the character of his work, and much that has hitherto appeared obscure and perplexing will be more easily explained, and Josephus' veracity vindicated. It will also explain his relation to the al-Asāṭīr or Septuagint, of which he curiously enough makes so little use in the first books of his antiquities. One example will suffice: the chronology of the patriarchs, in which he differs from the al-Asāṭīr Septuagint as well as from the Old Testament Hebrew text. Okay, and down the bottom there's a note, and you found now that also Holsker and Pauly Wisowa Encyclopedia Josephus Volume 1 comes to the same result, that Josephus made no use of the al-Asāṭīr or the Septuagint, and so forth. He's deliberately removed things, left things out, and so forth. Old Josephus. What's this about? King Ptolemy? And it seems to go into a great deal about Josephus. We hope that you found this very interesting. You might want to read it in your own time, at your own pace. So we will provide the link to this book below this video. If you like what we've presented you and what more, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below the video, and we'll get back to you on those as soon as we can. Then go share it with all you know, because it may shed a new light and reveal the vast difference between the ancient Samaritan texts and the Asatir the book of the Secrets of Moses or Moses and so forth with today's modern Bible translation. It may fill in some gaps or some blanks that you may have. So yeah, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, give us a like, add your comments below, and then go share it with all your family, friends and others.